Hi. So you've successfully completed week 2 of the EBD online course. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about some things that you have coming up, and then we'll talk about last week and the things you wrote about and we talked about. So the group presentation is due on a rolling basis depending on when you signed up. I want to make sure that you understand that there is a module titled Assignment Student-Led Presentation / Discussion. It includes a folder for each of the 5 areas with the meta-analysis or lit reviews in it. So you should pick your area and read each one of those meta-analysis or lit reviews and pick one intervention that you want to talk about. If you are not presenting that week, then you should go into the folders and also read the meta-analysis so you can learn about other interventions on top of what the group for the week is going to talk about. This week we have a group presentation that's actually going to be conducted by one person, so we should give her a round of applause for taking that on. And on top of that, it's my favorite topic, ADHD. So I'm excited to see what she has to say about the intervention that she selects. Make sure you follow the rubric. As long as you follow the rubric, you will do great on the assignment. You need to upload your project by Wednesday so that your classmates will have an opportunity to respond. Also, I really want you to use voiceover to describe your intervention, the research to support it, and the steps to implementation on the fidelity sheet. And there are examples of fidelity sheets. You can pick the one you want. You can make your own as long as it looks like a typical fidelity sheet. A fidelity sheet is basically a list of implementation steps that you can check off as you implement the intervention, or if someone's observing people implementing an intervention, then you can check off the fidelity sheets. I know that this is supposed to occur in response to an intervention. I don't know if any of you have ever experienced somebody walking in and watching you implement an intervention and checking off the steps as you go through it. We do it in research for sure to make sure that the interventions are followed the way they're written. Otherwise, we're not measuring the intervention itself. And the same thing with response to intervention. If you're not following the implementation steps the way that the evidence-based intervention is designed, then you can't say whether the effects can be contributed to or can be attributed to the intervention or not. Make sure that you include one discussion question so that your classmates can respond on the discussion post. Sorry about that. The other thing is that we have a quiz this Friday. It will be 25 multiple choice questions with one short answer. The test is open book, open notes. I'm going to set the timer for 1 hour and 15 minutes in order to give you time to complete it. The test will be open from Thursday night at midnight until Saturday at noon. But once you start, you'll have 1 hour and 15 minutes to take it. Again, use your books, use your notes, but you need to know some of the material so that you don't spend a lot of time flipping around trying to find the answers. All right, let's talk about what you guys did this past week. I was really impressed with your goals and objectives. This is an area that we talk about at the GSE, discussing, thinking about whether our students leave knowing how to write goals and objectives. We also know that when you're teaching and you're in the field, you're probably going to use a computer program with a drop-down menu, but you really need to understand the components of the goals and objectives and how they should be written. There will be times when you should write your own, that the drop-down menu doesn't exactly meet the needs of the child. So I encourage you to do that both here and in the field, but you guys did a great job. I was really proud of you. I asked you how many of you had conducted an FBA or a behavior intervention plan, either for a course or in practice, and only 27% of you said that you had actually done it, which surprised me because I hear a lot of times that this is an area of overlap in our program where during several classes, students are taught to conduct FBAs and write BIPs. So I was surprised and also excited that I wasn't teaching you something that you'd already heard. I realized that also that when you're in the field, it's possible that you will conduct an FBA or you will write a behavior intervention plan, but more than likely those things will be done by specialist, a behavior specialist, a BCBA maybe, whoever actually is responsible for those things for the IEPs for the students in your schools. However, it's super important for you to think FBA. Does that make sense? So if you see a student who's misbehaving, you can think, what's the function of this behavior? What's the antecedent? What's causing this behavior? What's the behavior that I'm really interested in? And the other one is, what are the consequences to that behavior? Because what you'll learn is that the consequences a lot of times are actually maintaining the behavior you're trying to change. For example, if it's my goal to get out of sitting in front of this computer and making a video for you, then I might shut the computer down repeatedly. Or I might say, I can't do this, I'm not going to do this, and just refuse to do it. So then the function of that behavior would be for me to escape this task, right? And so by saying I'm not going to do it, then I'm actually escaping the task. And if I was a student, you might say, fine, don't do it, go to the office. Guess what? They got what they wanted, and the behavior increases instead of decreases because it actually escaped the task. And then when you write your behavior intervention plan, you pick interventions to address the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequences. So the week coming up, you'll actually practice some of this with the video, or you're probably doing it this week. I just was interested to see that only 27% of you had done this before. So that's a little bit of history of FBA and BIPs. I'm interested to see what you have to say about the video of Abby and what you think the function of her behavior is. Remember, too, that the purpose of an FBA is to determine the function of behavior. Typically, there are two functions to behavior, to either escape something or to gain something. So I want to escape my work, or I want to gain your attention, or I want to gain a toy. Whatever's going on, those are the two functions. Sometimes with children with autism, we talk about sensory, and the purpose of the behavior is, the function of the behavior is actually for sensory reasons, but a majority of the time it's either to escape or to gain something. So think about this week as you're working on your assignments in this week's module. So it's interesting to read your comments about Lost Boys. Lost Boys, when I read Lost Boys, it really makes me think about many, many students that I've taught. I noticed that that was a theme throughout, too, of your comments. Someone stated that that the book really reminds them of a student that they've known. It reminds me of all the students that I taught in a small district in Texas. It was a rural district, and I taught adaptive behavior. I had middle school students that had spent more time in juvenile detention than they'd spent in schools. And it was a tough job, but it was so rewarding once I'd built rapport with them and started to really think about where they were coming from, get them to open up and talk to me, which wasn't easy. Yeah, then you learn what they're all about. It's really interesting because someone stated, one of the students in our class stated that they realized that the boys were just people who committed crimes rather than criminals. And they do. That's exactly who they are. They're people who had committed crimes. They're also boys who have lived a really hard life. And, yeah, you have to think about that. Allison wrote, as I reach the point of the school year where my frustration continues to grow, this student chooses to be oppositional, to be non-compliant, and to exhibit big behaviors. I try to remind myself that there's a reason for their acting out, and I need to try and understand. That's really hard this time of the year, Allison, so I give you a pat on the back. But it's really important to remember that behaviors are not about you. So as you read Lost Boys and you think about students that you know, I want you to think about, what are the behaviors about? It's not about you. So if one of your students gets really upset and screams F you, they're probably saying F you to a lot of things. And it's other than just you. And on top of that, it's about either trying to gain something are to escape something. And a lot of times with our kids with behavior disorders, it's about escape, right? It's about escaping work they can't do. It's about escaping relationships that they can't trust. So we need to think about that the whole time that you're reading through Lost Boys and you're working on the projects in this course. Someone else posted, I gained a sympathy for the boys and the hardships they endured that contributed to their violence. It's so important that if you're going to work with students with emotional behavioral disorders, that you have sympathy, not necessarily sympathy, but compassion and understanding. That doesn't mean they get away with everything, right? Because they'll just end up in jail if that's our attitude. But you always have to keep in the back of your mind, where are they coming from? What is this about? And how do I help them learn coping skills, or how do I help them learn skills they need, as opposed to how do I punish this out of them? Because that's not going to happen. They have been punished, right? So the categories that seemed to come out of your post were the causes of their behavior, the need, mental health issues and the need for help within those mental health issues, and school violence, which didn't surprise me because there's so much going on these days around school violence, and I will talk about that in a minute, especially in relation to Rebecca's post. But let's start with the cause of their behaviors. It's really hard. Garbarino talks about childhood factors that can ultimately influence their behavior and contribute to their behavior, but those things don't always result in criminal behavior. They definitely increase the risk for students to engage in criminal behavior. So it's really important to understand a person's childhood. If you're working with children, they're living their childhood, so what's going on in their life at that moment. I've worked with many children that had no parents at home. One student comes to mind who lived in the neighborhood, meaning that he floated between his aunts, depending on where he slept each night, because I think his mom was murdered and his dad was in jail. So when it came to teaching that student, it was really hard to reach out to a family, right? Who do I reach out to? So ultimately, I figured it out. But it was just by talking to him and talking to his relatives, that there was one aunt that was sort of his primary caretaker, and she was the one that was most interested, so I communicated with her. But that didn't mean that he was going home to her house that night. So that was his reality. His reality was he lived in the neighborhood. And so I had to work around that, or work within those constraints, right? I had a student that was being abused on a daily basis. We called and reported it multiple times. It was just, I could tell you stories all day long, but it's important to think about those things when children are misbehaving at school, right? And how do we change those things? The same thing with when I worked with middle school students, junior high students. What happened when they were young? What happened that made them think they could not trust adults, which a majority of them could not and didn't think they could. So you have to take all of that into account when you're looking at behavior and when you're looking at a child, or an adolescent for that matter. It's important to think about the exposure they have. One of your classmates posted that parents who are that there's a big issue today with parents who are both drug and alcohol abusers or users, and parents who are uninvolved in their child's life. That's true. That's true. But I don't know that that's different today than it was in the past. But it's something to consider. The other thing is that, leading to the next topic, which is mental health, it's important to remember that we can't blame parents, right? So even if we see risk factors, the parents are on drugs, the parents are drinking every night and drunk and not involved in their child's life, that's a risk factor. But it does us no good to blame the parents, right? And it's important to provide support that we can to parents that need help, and to really look at our students and think about their mental health issues, because not only do a majority of them come from some pretty at-risk situations at home, they also have mental health issues that are not being treated. So if home life is rough, it's highly unlikely that they're receiving mental health services, right? So I teach another class called Mental Health Services for Children and Adolescents, because I think school-based mental health services, because at school, we're in the perfect position to identify kids that need help. Not that we can diagnose mental health issues, but we can say it appears that this child needs some help, and reach out and try to help them get that help. The other issue is we have school counselors. We have school mental health services that we should refer our students to when we think something's going on. And a lot of kids today don't get the help that they need. The other issue that came to light while you guys were reading Lost Boys was you talked a lot about school violence, which didn't surprise me because there's so much talk of school violence these days. So it was interesting. Nicole said, one school massacre after another becomes imprinted on our national consciousness. It's clear that no matter how much we protect kids, chances are they're going to school with troubled people, boys, capable of pulling triggers. And that's true. It's highly likely that we have kids in our school that have mental health issues that need to be addressed. There's talk of mass shootings all the time, right? On the other hand, Rebecca stated that in his book, which came out in 2018, he states conflicts and fatalities from conflicts are a record low. Oh, so she was talking about a book that she was reading in which the author actually said that violence is lower these days than it has been in the past. So the author of that book said conflicts and fatalities from conflicts are at a record low. We do not have wars, and our medical knowledge has skyrocketed our survival age and rate. While I understand violence is still out here in the world, looking at the numbers, it's an extremely peaceful time compared to other decades. Rebecca said, even in Lost Boys, Garbarino mentions the actual number of children killed that year was less than 100 in a city of 3 million. This, and then she said, this is me trying to be positive on a negative topic. The reality is that that's possibly true. But we know more about the violence that's occurring, and now the violence is occurring in our schools, which is where we live, right, as teachers and educators. So we need to talk about and learn to address the needs of our students with emotional and behavioral disorders to try to alleviate some of that. Those are my thoughts and what you've written about what you've read so far in Lost Boys. I look forward to seeing what else you have to say about the book. It's really interesting. I want to say that I'm really impressed with the way you guys are kind of pulling the topics all together with what you read and what you watch. I know that it's a lot of work that we jam into 6 weeks, but it's really important for me that you learn it all. Brianna tied the video from last week in the first Nearpod presentation to this week's discussion. I thought that was super impressive, and several others of you have also done the same thing. So that's me for this week. I look forward to reading your post and watching your Nearpod and seeing how well you do on the quiz. I know you're going to do great. Feel free to reach out to me anytime you need anything. Have a good week.